The year is 1793. France is a tinderbox, primed to explode. The monarchy has fallen, King Louis XVI meeting his end at the guillotine. The First French Republic, born out of bloodshed and idealism, faces enemies on all sides. Austria, Prussia, Spain, and Great Britain form a formidable coalition, threatened by the revolutionary fervor sweeping across Europe. Internally, France is a cauldron of factions, each vying for power. Royalists plot in the shadows, yearning for the restoration of the monarchy. Amidst this chaos, a young republic fights for its very survival. In the south of France, a strategic port city becomes a focal point in this struggle. Toulon, a jewel on the Mediterranean coast, will become a crucible for the revolution and for the destiny of a young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte. Toulon in 1793 was more than just a city. It was the most important naval base in France, a symbol of the nation's maritime might. Its harbor, vast and deep, provided shelter to the French Mediterranean fleet. From here, French warships could project power across the Mediterranean Sea, challenging British dominance. The city's fortifications, considered formidable for their time, guarded the harbor approaches, making Toulon a prized strategic asset. The city's population, largely sympathetic to the monarchy, grew increasingly disillusioned with the revolution's excesses. Exploiting this discontent, a British fleet, under the command of Admiral Samuel Hood, appeared off the coast. The British offered a tempting proposition to the city's leaders: protection from the revolution in exchange for Toulon's allegiance. British troops, along with Spanish and Neapolitan forces, poured into Toulon, occupying its forts and turning its guns against the French Republic. The news of Toulon's fall reached the ears of a young artillery officer stationed in Nice. Napoleon Bonaparte, a Corsican by birth, was just 24 years old, but ambition burned brightly within him. The French Revolution had opened up opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than noble birth, and Napoleon was determined to seize them. He saw in the siege of Toulon not just a military challenge, but a chance to prove himself on a grand stage. At the time, Napoleon cut an unimposing figure. Yet, beneath the unassuming exterior lay a mind honed by rigorous study of military history and strategy. Napoleon, convinced of his own abilities, wrote to the Committee of Public Safety, offering a bold plan to retake Toulon. He was promoted to the rank of artillery commander, given command of the artillery forces besieging Toulon, and tasked with the formidable challenge of dislodging the British and their allies. Napoleon arrived at the siege of Toulon in September 1793. He found the Republican forces in disarray. The siege lines were poorly placed, the artillery scattered and ineffective. Napoleon, with characteristic energy and determination, set about transforming this rabble into a fighting force. He reorganized the artillery, bringing to bear his deep understanding of siege warfare. He established new batteries, carefully selecting their positions to maximize their effectiveness. Recognizing the importance of concentrated firepower, he ordered his gunners to focus their fire on key enemy positions. Napoleon's keen eye for terrain and his understanding of artillery's potential led him to identify a crucial target, Fort Les Guillettes. The assault on Fort Les Guillettes would be a test of Napoleon's tactical acumen and the resolve of his troops. The fort, perched high on a rocky outcrop, was a formidable defensive position. Its guns commanded a sweeping view of the approaches, making any direct assault a costly proposition. The British, aware of the fort's importance, had heavily fortified it, surrounding it with trenches, abattis, and artillery batteries. Napoleon, however, had devised a daring plan. He would launch a two-pronged attack. A feint attack would be directed against the fort's eastern flank, drawing the British defenders' attention and fire. Meanwhile, under cover of darkness, a select force would scale the cliffs on the fort's western side, a route considered by the British to be virtually impassable. The assault began under a moonless sky. Reaching the top of the cliffs, exhausted but determined, Napoleon's men overwhelmed the fort's defenders in a furious assault. Les Guillettes, the key to Toulon's defenses, fell to the French. The following morning, the British fleet in the harbor awoke to a terrifying sight. French artillery, now in complete control of the heights overlooking the harbor, opened fire. Cannonballs, heated to a red-hot glow, rained down on the British ships, setting them ablaze. The harbor, once a scene of British naval dominance, became an inferno. The British, realizing their position was untenable, made the difficult decision to evacuate Toulon. By December 17, 1793, just over 3 months after it had fallen, Toulon was back in French hands. The recapture of Toulon was a major victory for the French Republic, a much-needed boost to its morale. However, the victory came at a heavy price. The siege and the subsequent recapture of the city had left Toulon devastated. Many of its buildings lay in ruins, destroyed by bombardment or set ablaze during the fighting. The harbor, once a symbol of French naval power, was now a graveyard of burned and scuttled ships. The human cost of the siege was even more horrific. Thousands of soldiers, both French and British, had perished in the fighting. The civilian population of Toulon, caught between the revolutionaries and the British, suffered terribly. The siege of Toulon marked a turning point in the French Revolution and in the life of Napoleon Bonaparte. The victory itself, achieved against seemingly insurmountable odds, breathed new life into the struggling republic. It demonstrated the power of revolutionary fervor and the effectiveness of the republic's armies when led by capable commanders. For Napoleon, Toulon was his springboard to fame and glory. His crucial role in the siege, his strategic brilliance, and his courage under fire did not go unnoticed. The young artillery officer, once dismissed as a Corsican upstart, was now hailed as a hero of the Republic. His name, whispered in the corridors of power in Paris, became synonymous with victory. Toulon had been Napoleon's proving ground. The siege of Toulon, while a significant victory for the French Republic, cast a long shadow. The brutality unleashed on the city's inhabitants after its recapture served as a chilling portent of the excesses that would come to mark the revolution's later years. For Napoleon, Toulon was both a triumph and a tragedy. It was the birthplace of his legend, the moment he announced his arrival on the world stage. Yet, it also revealed his capacity for ruthlessness, his willingness to employ extreme measures to achieve his objectives.
I will never look at historical warfare the same way after learning how Russia has often turned the tides of war. Everybody is looking for heroes and villains in history, but the lines are often blurred. In many of its conflicts, Russia has utilized a chilling strategy: starvation and propaganda. Rather than direct confrontations, they burn fields and stockpiles, creating a scarcity that cripples both their population and the invading armies. Imagine being an invading soldier, facing not just the enemy, but also the starving civilians begging for food. This puts the invaders in a dire position. Help the civilians and deplete your own resources, or refuse and be painted as heartless by Russian propaganda machines. This tactic is not just a wartime improvisation, but a calculated strategy to gain strategic and propaganda victories. Remember, during the Napoleonic Wars, it was not Napoleon but Russia and Britain who declined the peace treaties. With the harsh Russian winter and vast lands at their disposal, Russia managed to outlast and outsmart one of history's greatest military commanders. Despite initiating the conflict, Russia's narrative often remains untainted, hailed as resilient rather than ruthless. In the game of war, perception is often as powerful as the actual conquest.